Hey guys, welcome to another Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be continuing our journey into the Star Wars universe with Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back. Released in 1980, Star Wars Episode 5 was written by George Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan and directed by Irvin Kershner. The story sees the rebels still struggling with their fight against the Empire, and after being brutally overpowered by the Empire on the ice planet Hoth, Luke Skywalker receives a vision from Obi-Wan Kenobi and is sent to find Jedi Master Yoda to begin his training. Meanwhile, Han Solo, Princess Leia, C-3PO and Chewbacca are relentlessly pursued across the galaxy by Darth Vader and the new bounty hunter Boba Fett. Returning to star once again are Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, James Earl Jones, David Prowse, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew and Alec Guinness, and features the debut of Jeremy Bulloch, Frank Oz and Billy D. Williams. So if you're here from my last review on the first Star Wars, you know that is genuinely one of my favourite films. So going into this one, could it possibly top the first one? And it's a question that many Star Wars fans asked around the time that it came out, and to this day they're still debating on which one's superior. And honestly, I think I'm in the majority here when I say that this absolutely tops it. In fact, it's pretty unanimously agreed among Star Wars fans that this is considered the best Star Wars movie that we have ever gotten. But just before I start the review, I do want to quickly mention that I will actually be going into the merchandising side of things for this movie as well, and I do have a few little show and tell things here, so I'll get into that a bit later on, but until now, let's just carry on with the review. So starting off with the returning cast for this movie, Mark Hamill returns as Luke Skywalker, and this is where he genuinely does step up his performances as this character. Like pretty much everybody else in this movie, he is kind of in his developing phase now, so this is where he's starting to learn more about what sort of person he's going to be, and he's gone from just the young farm boy, and this is the transition from him going from that into a full-blown Jedi. A lot of the focus of this movie is his struggle trying to train and become better, and Mark is genuinely really good in this movie. I mean, he was great in the first one, but this one he's able to bring a lot more depth and a lot more emotion to the role. Carrie Fisher also comes back as Princess Leia, and again, similarly, this is kind of a bit of a transition for her character, because you only really see her as more of a princess in the first movie. You only really sort of get little glimpses of her kind of leading a rebellion. This time you really get to see that. It is a genuinely great way of sort of evolving her character, and you start seeing just why it is that she is the leader. And even though it's to kind of further the love triangle, which is really awkward if you know how the next movie turns out, the way that they partner her up with Han and the Millennium Falcon crew, it really does help, because she is somebody who probably hasn't really got much experience like the smuggling side of the galaxy, so we kind of get to see her evolving into something that's able to adapt more to that world, so that when we see her in episode 6 she is basically one herself. And along with her we also have Harrison Ford coming back as Han Solo. He's still got the cocky sort of side to him, but he has evolved a bit more. Again, he is caring about his friends. Like one of the first scenes that we see with him is him trying to find Luke, and the way that he's desperate to find him, and that's really different from what we've seen from him in the past. And Harrison Ford genuinely is really great once again. I mean, considering this is the movie that he said that he didn't really want to do any more of them, he really does give it his all, and he is genuinely brilliant in this role. The majority of his scenes are with Carrie Fisher, and their chemistry is genuinely great. I do like their connection. I do like how they were partnered up, and I do like how their relationship does develop over the movie. It does provide some of the more funniest scenes, but it also provides some of the more emotional ones as well. Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker are back as well as C-3PO and R2, and again, they're genuinely great in this movie. I think Anthony Daniels has improved a little bit more. I do think that he seems to be a bit more comfortable in the role this time around, so I think that the more comedic side of him is definitely able to be brought out a bit more. And similarly with Kenny Baker, he's able to bring a bit more emotion out of R2-D2, which you wouldn't really think, but it's just the way that he operates him and the way that he sort of reacts to things. It really does give R2 a lot more personality. And also a big shout out to Peter Mayhew as well, because I feel like this is kind of where Chewie kind of became the more lovable character that we know him to be, because in the first one he was quite laid back and relaxed. In this one you kind of see a bit more of the funnier side of him as well, and he's got this bit more of a humorous personality to him. And similarly, the connection between him and Han is definitely a bit deeper in this one. You definitely do feel like these two have been friends for a really long time. Alec Guinness also makes a brief reappearance as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and again, he's genuinely really good in this. They definitely tried doing something a bit different with his character this time around, because in the first one he basically was like a bit of a father figure in a way, and he's just like this really nice teacher. In this one he is mystical ghost mode, and he doesn't really bring a lot of emotion to it, but that's not really what's needed from him for this. And I do like how it is that not only he portrays it, but the way that it's handled within context of the movie. One thing that I didn't mention in my review for the first film was the dialogue that was used in that film, because Star Wars has a very unique way of people talking. It's really hard to explain, but people don't really talk like that. It's very much stylized for that universe. When it came around to this one, we've got Lawrence Kasdan coming in to do basically like a bit of a screenplay touch-up in a way. He's able to make the dialogue seem a lot more realistic, and I think that it definitely makes it feel a bit more real. Characters had a lot of chemistry in the first movie, but this one they really bounce off each other, and I do feel like the dialogue is a big part of that. But also returning is James Earl Jones as the voice and David Prowse as the body of Darth Vader. This time around he is the central villain. In the first movie I always felt like Peter Cushing's Tarkin was more the central villain. This time Vader is front and centre. He is the one pursuing the heroes across the galaxy. Honestly, he is so much better in this movie. We find out so much more about him as well. He's way more ruthless than we've seen him before, with the way that each of the admirals who keeps failing him, he keeps killing them off. You'd think that the Emperor's probably call him out on that one, but you know, it's Darth Vader, you don't argue with him. You know, when I first watched the first movie, I never really found Darth Vader really that scary, and I didn't really in either this one or episode 6, but he is intimidating, and he is far more intimidating in this one than he was in the first film. It definitely helps that he's not having to share the screen with other villains this time, that he is front and centre. And on top of that, we also start to get a little bit of a glimpse about who he is. We start finding out a bit of his history. We start seeing a little bit of his interaction with the Emperor. You know that he does serve somebody else, so they're really setting up this big confrontation with whoever it is that's behind Vader. And also we do get a really quick glimpse of under the helmet. It's just the back of the head, so anyone who sort of thought that he might have been a robot or something in the first movie, that kind of disproves that theory. It is genuinely handled really well, and I love how this movie really does expand on who Darth Vader is. But of course we also get a few new characters getting introduced into this movie as well, and one of the new characters who makes one of the biggest impacts in this movie is Frank Oz as Yoda. I absolutely love Yoda. He's one of my favourite Star Wars characters, and I genuinely love how they introduce him into this movie, with the way that he's just like this crazy little creature that just sort of pops up in the middle of this jungle. But the way that they sort of just trickle out a few little hints that maybe he might actually be this Jedi Master that's hinted at a little earlier on in the film, and the switch for when you actually see what it is that he is, it is really well done. And considering he's just a puppet and it is all done with animatronics, it is so well done. I genuinely love how they handle this character and what they're able to do with him. And it also gifted us with the Seagull song, which is an absolute classic if you've never heard it. I'm just getting a little bit distracted here. When Rogue One came out in cinemas, me and a few friends actually got together. A few of them had gotten dressed up in like stormtrooper outfits and Jedi and a load of other different characters, and we got into this bar, and we basically had the whole place to ourselves. And what ends up happening is we had like the cantina music and all sorts going on in the background, and one of the people that had come along with us hadn't actually heard the song, so we hooked it up to the speakers. We had it playing on full blast, and we were all like singing along to it. Good times. So back to this movie. One of the brand new characters that's introduced into this film is Lando Calrissian, played by Billy Dee Williams, and he's a really great addition to this cast. You sort of get the impression that maybe he might sort of be a replacement for Han Solo. I mean, he definitely does have a few personality traits that are very similar to him, but you do start seeing that he is more of his own character. You know, he is genuinely really likeable when you first meet him, and the more that you see him on screen, the more layers you start seeing to him, the way that he is just looking out for his people on Bespin. And he is a genuinely great character, and I genuinely love Billy Dee Williams in this role and his fabulous capes. But we also get the introduction of Boba Fett, played here by Jeremy Bulloch. There's not an awful lot to really sort of say about this character because he's there, he's on screen, he looks cool, and that's really it. He doesn't really have much to say. I think he only has like 4 lines. He definitely makes an impression, and I really do love how they integrate him into this movie with all the other bounty hunters. And I love how Vader sort of singles him out as well, because like it definitely sets him up as though he's got this reputation. So there is a lot of mystique around him, so it definitely is a character that could be explored. And it is interesting seeing how many people had such a big reaction to him, because he is quite a mysterious character. Again, he genuinely does look really cool. He does have a good presence to him, and I like how they do present him in the movie. He definitely is smart, he is relentless. I was quite happy when they announced that he was going to be getting his own TV show. And when the movie was re-released in the special editions, one of the things that they actually did was they brought Tamara Morrison, who played Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, to come in and voice him. And it's one of the few changes that I do think actually does work quite well, especially within continuity of the Star Wars franchise. But I do genuinely love how Jeremy plays this role. Now, I do sort of wish that we had seen a bit more of this kind of Boba Fett. The story for this movie is definitely a lot more different from what we've seen before, because it's not like following a simple structure as such, because this one kind of gets turned on its head a little bit with like the big third act climax kind of saved more for the beginning of the film, and then allowing for a much more personal story throughout Act 2 and Act 3. It's a lot darker this time around. This is one of the darkest Star Wars movies that we've had, and there's a lot more of a deeper emotion to this one as well, especially with the connection with like all the stuff with the Force and the way that Luke is training, and we get to see a bit more of his psychology in a way. It feels a lot more grown up and mature. This isn't necessarily like a really nice happy movie that the first film was in many ways. This is a lot more depressing at times. One of the things that I did sort of notice when I was rewatching it is that all the heroes never really have any sort of time to settle and just sort of relax. They're all trying to work towards a goal, and most of that goal is escaping capture. So the story kind of splinters off in 2 different directions. Everything sort of starts off with everyone together and sort of feels like just a continuation of the first film, but then Han, Leia, Chewie, 3PO all get separated, and they head off on one story where it's basically just this one really long chase sequence across the galaxy with the Empire in hot pursuit, and Luke and R2 head off to a distant planet to go and find Yoda so he can begin his training. So on one hand we've got like this really great chase movie, and then we've also got this really deep dive, psychological, mystical, religious experience. Both parts are just as interesting. I would actually argue that the stuff with Luke and Yoda is actually more interesting. Like most of the fantasy elements in this, especially with the stuff involved in the Force, is genuinely expanded upon so much more, because we only really sort of see a glimpse of it in A New Hope. This time we really start to get to see like how the Force works. It's all sort of explained. It is really well done, and it is just as interesting as all the action-packed stuff. And I do have to mention this because I was actually quite a big fan of the Clone Wars, the 3D animated one from 2008. One of the things that I genuinely loved that show did was it sort of did a similar thing with this, where every so often it would have like this big mystical storyline, like all the stuff with Anakin, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, where they go off onto this world with the twins and the father, and the way that story unfolds. And that's one of the most interesting stories in the Clone Wars franchise. But we also have the stuff with Yoda and Darth Bane and all that stuff. I kind of find those stories a lot more interesting and engaging, so I genuinely do really love this movie because of what they were able to do. I definitely can't explain why it is that I do sort of gravitate towards those kind of stories, but I do like things with magic and I do like sorcery and things like that, so I definitely will sort of gravitate towards it. When it comes to like the mythology behind it all, I do find it really interesting and fascinating, so it is something that I do find more investing. And then the other part of the story, we also have the big chase stuff, and honestly that is just as interesting. It is really tense because they never really get a chance to really sort of settle down. They are constantly struggling, everything is working against them. It makes it so much more frustrating at times because it's just like, why don't you just do this? But they can't because this doesn't work. The tension really does build up throughout the movie, and I think that this is definitely a lot more intense than the last film. It is much darker. I'm genuinely quite shocked that it's still rated a MCU. I don't know if it's been re-rated since, but I'm really surprised that it somehow is. You know, I've got people losing limbs as these big philosophical questions. There's a load of torture scenes as well, which I'm really shocked that they still are managed to able to put in. It really does feel like a much more grown-up movie, so I am genuinely surprised that this is still technically geared towards kids. But I suppose it is kind of balanced out quite a bit with a lot of the humour stuff. This is definitely one of the funniest movies in the Star Wars saga. It has some really brilliantly funny scenes because the characters really have grown a lot more, and I think that the banter between them is so much better this time around. Similarly to the first movie, it is definitely in character. It never feels forced or just sort of shoved in just to try and lighten things up. It does feel real. It does feel like these are what the characters really are saying and how they feel, so they are genuinely really well done. You know, I think like Han Solo's got some of my favourite lines in this movie, where it's got like laugh it up, fuzzball, when he's arguing with Leia and she's saying that he ends up saying to her, oh, you're afraid I'm going to disappear without giving you a goodbye kiss? And she said, oh, I'd rather kiss a Wookiee. And he just goes, I can arrange that. And then as he disappears, you can just hear him going, he could use a good kiss. The film really feels a lot bigger than the last time around because obviously there just seems to be quite a bit more of a budget this time, and with that they're able to sort of expand the Star Wars universe a lot more with 3 brand new locations. The first one is Hoth, which is like this really big frozen ice planet. It looks very unique and it's such a big contrast from what we've seen in the previous movie, especially with the desert. And then we've also got Dagobah, which is where Yoda comes from, which is like this big huge swampy jungle world. It's always raining and foggy, and it looks very unique, and that extends to Bespin as well, Cloud City, one of the most unique cities that I've ever seen in any sort of fictionalized universe. The locations still feel like they are part of this same franchise. Similarly, they do all feel very unique from not only each other but what we have seen in the past. I do love how different this film can be. I think Hoth is probably up there with one of my favourite planets that they have had in the Star Wars franchise. I think it's because like I can't really think of many like frozen planets. It does look really unique, and I really do like how the way that the rebels have sort of integrated a lot of their weapons and their bases within the mountains. It generally does look really nice. And then on top of that, we've also got some brand new aliens as well, like all the ones that are on Bespin, like the little mine workers who we later see in The Mandalorian. There's not too many new additions within this one. Most of the newest ones are kind of introduced during the bounty hunter sequence, where Vader's got this big lineup of all these different bounty hunters that he's sending out to go and look for Han and Leia. Again, they all look really great and unique. The costumes are definitely great once again. Like every single character has their own unique look to them. With the way that the franchise sort of built itself more around merchandising as well, that they do introduce a lot of new costumes that do look quite different but similar to what we've seen before. So we've got like the snowtroopers this time, and a few of the Admiral uniforms are definitely a bit more different. I do actually quite like the snowtrooper outfits, like all the capes and everything. They're not my favourite stormtrooper designs. I'll get around to that when we get there. But as I said, everything sort of feels like a proper expansion to everything that we've seen before. It does feel like not only a sequel, but it does feel like we are getting to see more of this already established world from A New Hope. And with the way that things have been expanded on in this movie, one of the biggest things that they have really improved in this one is the action sequences. There's a lot more of them this time around, and especially because we're getting to see different locations, and I think the budget was definitely a lot bigger with this one. The action sequences are a lot grander. Like one of the first action sequences that we actually have in this is one of the biggest ones that is actually in the movie, with the snow speeders and the AT-ATs, which is like the big walkers. Honestly, there's so many iconic shots within this movie, and the image of those walkers heading towards the screen is so brilliant. It's one of the hardest levels on most of the games, where you've got to get the cord on the legs and you've got to like spin around them. But it genuinely is a genuinely fantastic sequence. And then we also, with Han and Leia, we also get the Millennium Falcon getting pursued by TIE fighters and the Star Destroyers. They end up in a big asteroid field. Honestly, it looks fantastic, and I think that they've definitely improved the way that the ships are manoeuvring around, because we never really got to see too much of that in the first film. They were quite sort of stilted, and they sort of drift here and there. so we don't really get to see them really sort of doing anything too terrific in a way. This one they really do improve on that a lot more. We get to see like some proper flying this time around, with the Falcon like weaving in and out of all the asteroids and all the TIE fighters spinning around, combined with all the asteroids which needed to be animated individually on their own. And of course the show-stopping sequence between Vader and Luke where they finally meet and we get to see the two of them clash for the first time. I said in my review for the last movie that I do feel like the lightsaber fight was a little bit disappointing. This one definitely does improve on that. This is definitely a lot more intense, and I think that there is a bit more action within this one. It's a lot longer and more drawn out, and I really love how brutal it can actually be at times, with like Luke getting quite sweaty and so he's getting all sort of bruised and messed up, and the way that Vader's just not even bothered by him, he's just using one hand to fend him off. It is a really great sequence, and I think that it really sort of leans well into what Luke's going through at this point in the movie, because he is still quite impulsive and he does think that he's kind of on top of things, so having him go up against like the biggest threat in the entire galaxy, I'm not really too bothered about spoiling this movie because I feel like it's so well known and so iconic that most people do know this. I won't talk about the big spoiler until a little later on, just in case, so you're being warned. But the fact that Luke goes in all guns blazing and he loses, it's really well done. It is so tense, and I love how it just builds on this emotional story that's been building up and up and up and up. It is definitely one of the better lightsaber battles that we have seen. And sort of following on what I said about Vader being a bit more intimidating this time around, this fight is actually kind of a big reason behind that, because we get to see how well he actually operates within a battle with somebody who's a bit younger and a bit more agile. So the way that he's using his environment around him, and he's like just using the force to like throw objects at him, the way that he's able to kind of hide in the shadows, and he actually gets a bit of a jump scare as well. It is a brilliant sequence and it is handled really well. And when it comes to the effects of this movie, this really builds on everything that's happened beforehand. This expands everything that we've seen before, and honestly I think that the effects designs that they actually have in this are so much more dynamic, and I think that they really do work a lot better. Most of the effects that they had definitely were groundbreaking within the first movie, but honestly I think this one really does top it in terms of how well it's done, because this one really does blur a lot of different techniques together in a really good way, because you have a mixture of the models when all the ships are flying around, which I think is improved on a lot better in this one because you can see them moving a lot better. Then you've also got a lot of the puppetry that they use, like stuff with Yoda. They did a lot of stop motion for this one as well, which actually took me quite a while to actually realise that that's what they did. Everything visually looks so much better in this movie as well, to the point where even like the special editions, this one's not really as touched as much as the first film and Return of the Jedi, which is a really great testament just how good the effects actually are, because they have sort of left it alone mostly. They still look good and they still hold up. And since I mentioned it, the special editions for this version of the movie, there's not as many changes this time around, and honestly I think that this is one of the few times that the changes actually do benefit it in many ways. Not only does it sort of help stick the continuity better with the way that they've got Tamara Morrison voicing Boba Fett, so it's still sort of within continuity of the prequels, but then you've also got Ian McDiarmid making his appearance as the Emperor, which wasn't originally the case. It was like some just creepy looking thing in a hood, and that's all they really sort of showed on screen until he had a proper appearance in Return of the Jedi. And like A New Hope, there's a few more shots of the spaceships flying around, especially around like Bespin. Again, Bespin's something that they really do sort of expand on, because there's a lot of backgrounds that they used when they were in the cities, because you don't really see the outside very much. So what they did in this one is they actually chroma keyed out a lot of the backgrounds, and they added a lot of the city and clouds and ships flying past, so it actually makes it look like it's actual city in the sky. I can't do this review without bringing up the soundtrack for this movie, because this is peak John Williams. The soundtracks that he made for the first movie are genuinely great, they're really iconic, but this is where a lot of the themes that most people will probably recognise started to be introduced. In terms of the Star Wars soundtracks, for me this one's probably second. I'll get around to the first one when eventually we do get around to reviewing that one. The ones that they do have in this, especially specific tracks, these are some of the most iconic Star Wars sounds in the entire franchise. Like specific scenes, we've got like the asteroid fields, and you know, the music that's in that scene, that's definitely something that I always remembered quite well. And then the soundtrack for Hoth as well, when the AT-ATs and the snow speeders are going at each other, it is really iconic. I won't encourage a drinking game every time I say iconic. But then we also have finally the introduction of the Imperial March. This is the movie where it first appears. Like Darth Vader and the Empire and all the Imperials, they didn't really have any actual theme as such in the first movie. And one mistake that I do see a lot of people mention is that they say that this is Darth Vader's theme. It isn't. It's the Imperial theme. It's the theme of the Empire. It only ever actually shows up when you have the ships flying around, and that's really what this theme is meant to represent, the power of the Empire. Soundtrack for this movie is genuinely brilliant, and honestly it is one of John Williams' best. You know, for all the praise that I'm heaping on this movie, one of the things that I found quite surprising is when I was actually researching what the general reaction was when this movie came out, it didn't really have as big a reaction as you might think. Like, it definitely was like this huge event, but people weren't really sort of happy with it as you'd think they would be. It is odd comparing that to how the reaction to it is now, with like, I think it was Empire magazine did a film countdown of like the top 100 movies of all time, and Empire Strikes Back was ranked number 1. Maybe it was the cliffhanger, maybe it's just because the movie is genuinely quite down compared to the last movie, because I was quite bright and happy. This one's quite dark and depressing. I don't know. What do you guys think? Now, I said I was going to bring it up, so I might as well do this now. One of the reasons why this movie seems to have a bigger budget than the last one is because the merchandising that was used for the first movie, it had never been done before, and George Lucas was able to use the money that he made from the merchandise and able to fund this movie and Return of the Jedi. It is a really smart move because, as I said in the last review, the studio, pretty much everyone who was a part of it, didn't really have a lot of faith in what the movie was going to be able to do. So what George Lucas did with his contract was that he left out the fact that he was doing 2 more from the contract, and he was able to use the merchandising as an angle to sort of push those 2 movies. And the merchandising wasn't really a thing back then. This is kind of game changer in a way when it comes to how movies are released. It's really hard to actually think of a movie franchise now that doesn't have like tie-ins in some way, whether that's like toys or action figures or playset games, anything you can possibly think of. And it's quite clever, especially with the way that they sort of change it with every single movie. So even though you may have like the basic design of the lightsaber for one movie, each character will have their own one, so then they can bring out another one and they can sell that as its own thing. And I'm aware that I've actually got a few of these, so I'm aware of the irony of me bringing this up. But from a business standpoint, it is genuinely quite a clever idea, because yes, you will start wanting to like complete the sets, and collectors are definitely going to want to expand their collection a bit more. I'm not really somebody who does a lot of collecting stuff, but every so often I'll just see something that I just really love, like things like few little figures and ships. You know, family members and friends may find things and they think, oh, you may like this, and end up with it. And every so often, like, something will come out and I just say, I really want that. That's definitely one. But then on top of that as well, we've also got like the expanded universe as well, where we have all the tie-in books and comics that produce, I think it's Marvel who actually produce them now. That's something that I've really been quite interested in seeing, because it's other creators putting their own ideas in and expanding the Star Wars universe. Now, I do have a few myself, and I'm trying to get around to reading. I haven't read these ones just yet, but I will be getting around to them as soon as. Honestly, some of them are genuinely really good. The ones that I have read are actually pretty good. And one of the earliest ones that was released was, I think it was something like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, something like that. It's basically like this really strange what if scenario, because it was released shortly after the first movie came out, and it kind of acts like a sequel, but this is prior to The Empire Strikes Back, so a lot of things are very different, like especially with regards to like Luke and Leia, where it really sort of builds on their relationship. It is a really interesting read, and if you can find it, I'd highly recommend it. But it is kind of mad to think that this was kind of the movie series that really brought this about. Like, apparently when the figures for the very first movie came out, they weren't even properly ready to go. What they did was they brought out these cards that had pictures of the figures on them, which was basically like an IOU in a way, so that you could sort of buy it, and then when the toys were in stock you could actually go to the store and say, I got this, and you can get the figures. So if you are somebody who does collect a lot of figures from different movies, franchises, anything like that, this is the film series to thank for that. Overall, when it comes to this movie, it is flawless. I genuinely cannot think of a single thing that's wrong with it. This is one of my absolute favourite movies. It's bigger, it's better, it's deeper, it's darker, the characters are more emotional, the more real, the dialogue's better, the performances are better, the effects, the music, the expanded lore, everything about this is how you do a sequel. It is able to stand on its own, and I do think that you can watch this without seeing the one prior to it, but it does benefit from that because all the introduction, everything are already established, so you can just go into this one and you know everything. And this is one of those few times that I'm not going to say I recommend checking this movie out. I am telling you, go and watch this movie. And once again, if you haven't guessed, my rating for this movie, easily 10 out of 10. I am going to briefly talk about the big twist of the movie. I don't really feel like I should really put a spoiler tag on this, but I wanted to kind of save it for now just in case anybody hasn't really seen it. So if you aren't aware of this twist, which I'll be highly surprised if you don't, because I feel like even most non-Star Wars fans are aware of it, then now's a pretty good time to click away. The big twist of this movie is that when Luke and Vader are facing off, Luke loses and Vader takes off one of his hands. The revelation is that Vader is actually Luke's father. Now, I said this in my first review, I honestly can't remember the first time that I watched these movies. It's all sort of blurred together, so I don't know what my emotion was like when I first saw it. It is definitely a big shock, and it is handled so well. Apparently when they were actually filming it, and they wanted to try and keep it a secret as much as they can, apparently what Vader said on set was, Obi-Wan was the one who killed your father, which is a pretty shocking twist. This twist that they have in the movie completely shapes everything that happens in the saga from this point on, and just how much of an impact that this scene actually had on not only the franchise but cinema on a whole, because this, I honestly think, is one of the best twists in cinema history. The way that I can sort of back that up is the fact that there's so many parodies, spoofs, skits, animations, recreations. There's so many things that have tried to recreate this. Honestly, that to me is a mark of how much of an impact it's made. It is a genuinely good twist, and it definitely helps that the performances from Mark Hamill, James Earl Jones and Dave Prowse, it really sells it. We don't really have a lot of big moments like that in cinemas nowadays. I feel like the only movies that have ever really sort of actually come near it are things like the Avengers films, and being a part of those kind of audiences and actually getting to experience these things firsthand, it is genuinely special. So even though I have said in the past or maybe you don't necessarily need to see this movie in the cinema, or maybe you do, I am still an advocate for actually going to see a movie in the cinema, because that is where most movies are intended to be. And speaking of which, when it became the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, a lot of cinemas across the UK were actually starting to show it back in cinemas. I decided to give it a go, and honestly it was a genuinely great experience. So I don't know if maybe like the 50th anniversary for any of these films, whether they'll actually play them once again, but honestly, if you do get the chance to see any of these movies on the cinema, do go for it. So that's all I've got to say for today, guys. So thank you so much for tuning in to the second episode of Star Wars. Keep an eye out for number 3. Please like, please subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel. Feel free to comment. Do you have any suggestions for any rewinds you want me to do in the future? Any movies you want me to take a look at? You can also find me on Facebook at rewindreviews.youtube. That's all I've got to say for today. So thank you so much for watching, and may the force be with you.